Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Sarah here. I'm in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. I'm staying with friends over Thanksgiving.
And it's Mariana, a.k.a. Misinformation, in the worldwide headquarters of Americast.
And it's
London.
Justin sitting alongside Mariana, interrupting her already in the worldwide headquarters.
Back for the first time since Donald Trump won the election.
I'm so excited.
In the worldwide headquarters.
I literally can't keep myself quiet.
Well, Justin, Mariana, we should probably just run through where we are with Donald Trump's legal cases, because there has been some movement on this in the last few days, in fact. Of course, this is related to the fact that he won the election, and that does rather change the whole picture, really, of the criminal cases against him. So I'll run you through some of them very quickly. The January the 6th case for obstructing Congress and trying to overturn the election results, that's been dropped by the special prosecutor, Jack Smith. He said that the Constitution pretty much stipulates sitting presidents can't be prosecuted, and they've decided that even though he's not the president yet, he's only the president-elect, and he had been indicted when he was a private citizen, nonetheless, they think it would be unconstitutional to try and prosecute him for that. The classified documents case, all those documents he was hiding in the spare toilet down in Mar-a-Lago, that's also disappeared. The special prosecutor's abandoning that one too. And of course, the judge earlier had actually dismissed that case, but the special prosecutor was appealing that. Well, that's all gone away as well.
And what's going on in New York? Because that case did actually come to court, didn't it? And he's awaiting sentencing. Is he still awaiting sentencing? What's going on there?
Well, it might be a very, very long wait for sentencing on that one. So that's the hush money case, where he was convicted, you're right, on 34 counts of basically erroneous bookkeeping, covering up the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. So sentencing was set for just after the election, and it was postponed indefinitely, essentially. Legal arguments are going to the judge. Beginning of December, he said they need to be in by. And Trump's team are saying, well, the whole thing should be set aside. You can't sentence somebody who's going to be serving as the president. The defense are saying, no, you could just set it aside for 4 years, and come 2029, when he's finished his presidential term, then you could sentence him. So the judge will decide either way on that. But what we do know is, not only is he definitely not going to jail, now that he's been re-elected, he's not even going to receive sentence for that until at the very earliest he's left office.
And then the one other one, the Georgia one.
Yeah, when we were in...
we were excited by.
We were in Atlanta, and
Yeah.
And did you actually go into the courthouse? I can't remember.
I didn't get to the courthouse, but I did get to sit down with John Eastman. So John Eastman being the guy who kind of revved up the crowd on January the 6th and really got them going, Trump lawyer. And he sat down with me in Atlanta. I think you were doing something else that day, Mary.
That was when I found the taxi driver.
Oh, yeah, you found the taxi driver.
He was convinced
who
by
also
the AI
was a great
pictures.
star of our piece, yeah. But I sat down with Eastman, and I said to him, you're going to jail, aren't you? If you're convicted, you're in real trouble. And I still remember, Sarah, he kind of giggled, actually. He was a very amiable guy, one-to-one, and he just said, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge till then. It was almost as if he knew that it was gonna be fine. But is he fine? And is Trump fine in Georgia? What's the deal?
Trump will be fine in Georgia. So that case sort of got halted because there was this scandal over the fact that the prosecutor, Fani Willis, had been having a romantic relationship with somebody that she had hired to work on that case. And there was a whole legal hearing about that, and that really gummed things up quite a lot. And
the legal term for that is screw up, isn't it?
Yes, which didn't do her reputation much good, and he got dropped from the case. So that's why it had slowed up. Of course, I mean, we've still got this idea that you can't try a sitting president. If that's what Jack Smith in the federal cases has decided, that's almost certainly what a judge in Georgia will decide. It's fanciful to imagine that Donald Trump could be prosecuted over that. That doesn't mean his co-accused won't be, though. In the hush money case, for instance, Jack Smith has dropped the charges against Donald Trump, not against the two other people that were named in that indictment. So I think John Eastman maybe should be a little bit worried that case may yet go forward just without Donald Trump. And some of the people in that case took plea deals already, and it was obvious that, the prosecutors really, really wanted people to drop Donald Trump in it. Well, if he cannot be tried, I don't know, maybe the value of their evidence against him goes down and it gets a little bit harder to get out of. I'm no lawyer, but that's what I would be worried about if I was an accused there.
And Sarah, just to remind Americasters, so Jack Smith is this role of special prosecutor. What does that actually mean?
So the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who is supposed to be entirely impartial. He runs the Justice Department, and that really is at arm's length from the White House. But he is appointed by the president, and so he wanted to make sure that this investigation looked as though it wasn't remotely political. So he appointed a special prosecutor, i.e. an independent outside counsel, to come in and do the work. And that's been done many, many times before, precisely when the White House wants it to look as though the investigation and the prosecution is entirely independent. So he was brought in specially to do that, both in the January the 6th case and the classified documents case, because they were federal cases. The Georgia case is slightly different, of course, because that was brought by the Georgia authorities themselves. And the key thing about that is that the president doesn't have pardon powers over state offences. So if it gets to it, and say his two co-accused in the documents case do go to trial and are either convicted or sentenced or whatever, he can pardon them because it's a federal offence, so they don't have too much to worry about. John Eastman couldn't be pardoned because that's a state offence and the president has no jurisdiction there.
Whoa, that's a really interesting one, because he'd be very cross if Eastman went down, as would Eastman, no doubt, and his family, and he would do something, wouldn't he? It would be quite tempting for him to do something to try to find a way of getting him out, or at least putting him onto some sort of long-term appeal curve, I suppose, that kept him out of jail, if that was what he was facing.
And the one thing we do know about this incoming administration is that they are certainly going to be prepared to try novel things. I mean, there's this whole theory that we've discussed before as to whether or not to get his cabinet appointees through. He can just adjourn Congress and put them through as research appointments, which, you know, might be just technically within the bounds of the Constitution, but it would be unprecedented, certainly not the way things were intended to be done. I don't think they'll have any shame in just doing anything that they can, whether or not it looks bad or looks as though it's not what the founding fathers would have wanted. So there are probably all sorts of legal strategies that I don't know about that he could use to get his co-accused, because they're all close allies of him, the people who've also been charged in the Georgia case. So, I mean, look, John Eastman, I'm sure, had a reason for looking so pleased. And of course, at the time, he didn't even know for sure that Donald Trump was going to get re-elected, did he? But now he has been. I mean, it just completely changes the legal landscape totally across America. And so a lot of people are really cross that these cases weren't brought earlier, that as soon as Donald Trump left office, people didn't start working on this, because then they might have been through the whole court process already, and you wouldn't look at them having to be dropped because he's been re-elected.
Isn't that true?
Yeah,
That's
I was gonna ask you that, Sarah, because I mean, you think of some of the rhetoric, particularly around the election, including that comes from sort of Donald Trump's own team that we're going to talk about. And this idea of stuff not being fair and kind of like people in power and the establishment not being held to account, that's felt like quite a big thing that people care about. And yet, I'd be interested kind of beyond, I guess, people who are really into politics, what the average person thinks about this. Like, does it just mean that this whole kind of legal impunity thing, are people kind of okay with it because they think, oh, well, he is the president? Or are they like, hang on a second, he's the president? That doesn't mean he can get away with stuff that we wouldn't get away with.
Well, interestingly, of course, it does mean he can get away with just about anything, because remember, on top of all of this, you've got that Supreme Court ruling that came in a few months ago, which said that sitting presidents are essentially immune from prosecution for pretty much anything they do as long as it's an official act. So, you know, and there's been much debated. Does that mean you can officially order the assassination of another foreign head of state and that would be okay? It's, you know, it's really very, very broad immunity that he's been given, that he'll have when he goes into the White House the next time. The way the legal cases rolled out, the timing of it all was, I think, unfortunate would be a kind way of putting it. It really didn't work politically. So, if anybody was trying to weaponize the justice system against Donald Trump, they did an incredibly poor job of it. On one hand, you had the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, trying so hard to look as though this wasn't political and moving really slowly and really carefully over the January the 6th case. That meant it took so long to appoint a special counsel. Here we are now. They didn't even get into court before the election. On the other side, that New York hush money case, for instance, frankly, those were not the world's most serious charges. I mean, we were really talking about bookkeeping errors, because it's not illegal to pay a porn star who claims that she slept with you hush money. That's entirely on the up and up. It's covering up the payments that he was convicted for. And a lot of people looked at that and thought, hang on, if his name wasn't Donald Trump, there's no way he would be in court for this, because this kind of thing happens in business all the time, and people are not dragged through court and end up with criminal felony convictions for it. And because that's the case that went first, and the only one that we saw actually play out in court, that gave people an opportunity to look at this and say, they are just picking on him. And also because Alvin Bragg, who brought that case, he campaigned to be elected as the Manhattan Attorney General, saying he would prosecute Donald Trump if you elected him. So it looked nakedly political. So I think it is actually entirely understandable why many, many, many voters looked at this and thought he was being treated unfairly. And because the only case that they've seen the detail of was that hush money one, then they'll probably shrug their shoulders and say, well, yeah, I mean, he won the election fair and square, so let him get on with it.
Can I just pat us all on the back? Because, I mean, we get many things wrong, or I get many things wrong.
No, we don't.
But we did actually, right from the start, I remember us being a little bit sceptical about these court cases as they mounted up and thinking, what's the politics of this, irrespective of whether they should or should not be brought kind of legally. And I think we were dead right, actually, because the politics of it turned out to be, you look at the opinion polls, Sarah, that are right at the beginning said when people were asked, would you elect a president who was a felon? And they all kind of clutched their pearls and said, no, goodness me, no, or lots of people did. But then actually when it came to it, they've forgotten all about that sort of stuff for all the reasons that you've just
well, and
outlined.
if anything, it possibly benefited Trump because, the mugshot and everything else that came with it.
I'd forgotten the mugshot. I mean, look at that. He has this ability to weaponize stuff, doesn't he? The mugshot, the rubbish delivery, the McDonald's thing. He has this thing, and they, you could argue, I suppose, a brighter set of political operatives, never mind intervening to get him prosecuted, might have intervened not to get him prosecuted. But
you would think that the White House, if they were prepared to intervene in any of this, would have stopped the New York case, because there was you could see the trajectory of his political comeback. I remember being at Mar-a-Lago just after the midterms, November 22, when the red wave didn't materialize, the Republicans hadn't done well, and the candidates who'd done really badly were the particularly kind of MAGA ones that Donald Trump had backed. They underperformed, so he looked like he was absolutely at his lowest politically, and there was this really low energy, disappointing, kind of pointless campaign launch in November in 2022 in Mar-a-Lago. Then as soon as he's charged early the following year in this New York case, suddenly his poll ratings started going up, and he could see that, and he leapt on it and went on and on and on about the weaponization of the Justice Department, until, as Mariana says, we get to the point where he's clearly carefully rehearsed the expression that he used in that mugshot photo in Georgia. That's where that was taken. And then we saw it on T-shirts and posters all over the place during the campaign. That became a real kind of badge of honor for him, didn't it? I don't really think that Trump's comeback could be summed up in two photographs. From that mugshot to the one just after he was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, when he stands up and puts his fist in the air, and you can see the American flag behind him and the blood on his ear. And that was the arc of what happened to Donald Trump, I think, and put him back into the White House. And it did really begin with these legal cases.
And also that narrative, I mean, we can obviously not do an episode of Americast without mentioning Elon Musk, but it was the thing that he really seized upon when he was expressing his support for Trump. And I guess the assassination attempt that happened in July was the thing that really kind of galvanized that support. But it was based around this idea that people are out to get Donald Trump, and whether it's the legal system or whether it's someone with a gun, he's under attack, and here's why you should support him. And all of that worked so well. And like you say, Sarah, I mean, those images, him with the garbage truck, him at McDonald's, they were this kind of series of iconic photos, much of which actually focused on this idea of Donald Trump, the persecuted.
The persecuted and the strong, because that's the other side of this, isn't it? I mean, if I was facing all these court cases, not that I've done any of these things, I hasten to add, but I'd feel nervous, actually. It would really ruin my whole day, if not my whole year.
Nice.
And yet Trump, he was so, throughout the whole thing, so aggressive and on it. And I mean, he was facing prison, as we said several times, and we weren't making it up. He genuinely was, wasn't he? And yet he had this kind of self-belief that I think people like Musk were attracted to.
And I think that is what it's that kind of Donald Trumpian approach, isn't it? Of anything that's bad, you make a part of it, and you make part of the story, and you use it to your advantage. It's worth saying as well, I guess, that part of those tactics, it wasn't just about saying I'm strong, sort of in the face of this nebulous kind of bureaucracy that's trying to get me, what people would refer to as the deep state, but also that he went after very specific people. And you imagine what it's like now for some of the judges and jurors even who'd been involved in some of these cases and experienced huge amounts of online abuse, threats, really, really difficult stuff, kind of for nothing, because nothing's come of any of it. And I think those tactics are perhaps when we talk about what Donald Trump is going to do now, people are thinking about that language that he used and the way he took aim at some of those people, some who are, important and quite powerful, like Jack Smith, for example, but then others who are, like a judge or a juror or someone who perhaps didn't expect to be targeted with online abuse and sometimes offline harassment in that way.
Yeah, and that brings us to the question of what he's likely to do now that he has re-won the White House, because he complained all the time about the Justice Department being used against him and the weaponization, as he called it, while at the same time saying that he intended to do exactly the same thing if he was re-elected and would bat away charges of hypocrisy by saying, well, they did it to me, so they need to be prosecuted for that. And also, Mariana, as you say, absolutely rightly, this idea that there is a deep state that's working against Donald Trump, but also working against all the people who support him and America's better interests, and he's going to use the justice system to disband that. And of course, as we've talked about several times in Americast, Matt Gaetz, the former Republican congressman, is not going to be his new Attorney General, but once he withdrew, he has nominated this woman, Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, to take on the job.
It's worth saying as well, that word deep state, I know we've mentioned it a couple of times now.
It's 2 words. You're worse than Joe Biden.
2 words. Deep state refers to this kind of, this concept of a sort of shady cabal of people who are all working behind the scenes in powerful places to do stuff. And powerful people do bad things, and there is corruption and so on and so forth. But this word is often used in a very conspiratorial context when there won't be the evidence to back up that idea. And actually, it's one of those words that's almost migrated from the sort of fringes of the internet into the mouths of politicians and then kind of back again.
You're insisting that it is one word, isn't it? And actually, on reflection, I think you're right. I think probably if you're talking about the deep state, it's a thing, isn't it? That is probably one word. I don't know if you have a view on the lexicography of it, Sarah, or indeed
I think it
substance.
might be one word, but with S capitalised in the middle of it.
The deep state.
That for a compromise?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, love. Look, there are all sorts of questions about this woman, aren't there, Pam Bondi, and her enormous enthusiasm for Donald Trump. And actually, they're encapsulated, or at least one of them is encapsulated, in an email that we've had from Christine Brown in Bexhill-on-Sea on the south coast of England, who says, I was living in Florida when Pam Bondi was Attorney General, this is in Florida, and I remember that she was going to prosecute Trump over fraud claims to do with Trump University. Then Trump donated $25,000 to her re-election campaign, and the prosecution went no further.
That's the sort of thing that, deep state conspiracy theorists would latch on and say, well, that definitely proves there's a corrupt relationship. I'm sad to say $25,000 isn't enough to make prosecutions go away, I don't think, Justin. Do you? I mean, if and Pam Bondi herself says that her decision not to carry on with the investigation was in no way influenced by that donation or any others. But if you are making donations looking to affect that kind of outcome, and you need to put an extra couple of zeros on the end of it, don't you, Justin?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. Well, don't ask me as if I'm the person paying the zeros, but I see what you're getting at. No, I mean, it sounds like those. I mean, I suppose the thing is, there is a relationship there, and it has been financial. But then you've got to think. I mean, there is just so much money swirling around, isn't there, in American politics and people? Well, I mean, goodness, Donald Trump gave to Kamala Harris's campaign when she was running for Attorney General of California. You can't necessarily, in a way that would be convincing in a court of law, you can't say, oh, you made this payment and then you did X, Y, or Z, because they're all making payments and they're all doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, exactly. But we shouldn't get away from the fact that Pam Bondi is a Trump loyalist and that she has been picked because she will almost certainly go after Trump's opponents, enemies, he would call them, and use the Justice Department to do that. And I can tell you for sure, there are a lot of people in America who are very, very worried about this. Some of them are high-profile legal figures and politicians. Some of them are just ordinary folk that work for the FBI or the Department of Justice. But there is a great anxiety about what is going to happen when they come in and take over the Justice Department. It's really obvious Trump thinks this is one of the most important appointments he's going to make, and that's because this is high on his agenda, going after his enemies.
What does that actually look like, going after his enemies? Like, what does that entail? Like, do they end up in
I was
prison?
wondering that. It's interesting that Sarah's gone to upstate New York in case she can hop across the border into Canada if it gets tricky. I mean, is that what we're talking about? Will Jack Smith have to leave the country, do you think? Go and live in Canada or something? Because people always, Democrats, I mean, I've got friends who said before the election in DC, I'm going to have to leave the country. And then you look at them and these are quite wealthy people. There's no chance at all of you leaving the country. But actually what you're saying, Sarah, is there are some individuals to whom this might make a real difference, might make them feel a bit edgier than they otherwise would.
And I don't know that leaving the country would necessarily help. And of course, we're only talking about really rich people who've got the ability to make that choice. An ordinary employee in the Department of Justice can't suddenly decide that he wants to go and live in Bexhill, can he, and work there.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure Christine would welcome him.
Christine would welcome him, yeah.
Or her.
But yeah, so if Jack Smith moved to Canada, there's an extradition treaty, isn't there? There's some countries, aren't there, in South America you can disappear to where there's no extradition treaty, but that would be a little bit dramatic. But so what does that look like? It's a very, very good question. And Donald Trump, I mean, he's listed loads and loads of people that he wants to prosecute. And I mean, we could just go through some of it. So on the political side, he's talked often about Joe Biden needing to be investigated. He says he's the most corrupt president in history. He hasn't evinced a huge amount of evidence for that, but we know that there are questions swirling around some of the work Hunter Biden did when his father Joe was vice president. There's still questions about what he was being paid for from a Ukrainian energy firm and from China as well. So you might want to look at some of that. Liz Cheney, who chaired the January the 6th congressional hearings, he's said many times that she should be prosecuted. He's even talked about Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, and without really necessarily telling you exactly what charges they should be up for. But even if you don't get very far with that, and you can't even get an indictment past a grand jury, just the simple fact of starting an investigation and how invasive that can be for these people's lives could really, really be a very, very effective punishment in itself, even if it doesn't end up in criminal charges.
I also am quite interested in everything with the kind of moving on from officials, I guess, to the January the 6th rioters, because there was quite a lot of discussion about the length of their prison sentences, whether that was fair or not. There's been some kind of outrage about...
Yeah. This is now letting people out of jail, not putting them in.
And will he, exactly, and will he do something about that? Will he let them out? And like, what does that say about what he thinks about January the 6th? Because, the people who did go to prison were people who went to prison for doing things that were illegal.
Oh, I think he'll let them out on day one. I think that one of the first things he will do will be to pardon everybody who is in jail for January the 6th. And a lot of them are serving their time in Washington, so we'll see them very quickly as well. I mean, he has spoken about them being martyrs and American heroes. I think he will very quickly do that. And yes, there was some violence on that day, and that's why some of them are serving really quite lengthy prison sentences. But all the Trump and the MAGA crowd kind of deny that and say that it's been overblown, and they keep insisting that nobody died.
Yeah, always a setup.
What is it that Steve Bannon called it? Oh, the Fedsurrection.
Yeah.
Suggesting that, it was the Feds, it was the government, the deep state who
had actually carried
orchestrated
it out
that.
and framed them or set up some of the other rioters.
And while letting them out, one of the things that he's suggested prosecuting Nancy Pelosi for was not having enough security at the Capitol on the day when she was Speaker of the House of Representatives. And I don't know if you remember this. During the last debt ceiling negotiations, when they were trying to pass a budget and the Democrats weren't doing very well, one Democratic representative in the House pulled the fire alarm. To delay proceedings, basically. And everybody had to file out. And in the end, he admitted that he'd done it simply to stall the proceedings because they needed to buy a little bit more time to manage to agree a budget. Well, Donald Trump's even talked about prosecuting him.
He's getting
because
life.
What he did was delaying Congress from being able to make a decision. And that's, kind of entertaining because that's exactly what the Jan 6ers were prosecuted for. And in fact, that's what one of the charges against him on the Jan 6 cases was, that he was trying to obstruct an official proceeding of Congress. So, so he wants to charge that congressman for doing the same thing with the fire alarm.
Yeah.
I'm also just interested in what kind of precedent that sets. I mean, I'm thinking about the kind of world that I frequent, and Elon Musk and the kinds of things that he's been sharing over the past few weeks. But then also if, for example, like you say, Sarah, that Donald Trump does decide day one, right, I'm going to pardon all of these rioters. What does that say when something else happens that people don't like and they, whether kind of slightly pushed by social media or not, maybe following Elon Musk's tweets, turn up somewhere and behave in a way that's quite violent? Like, does that, or is it the case that that was a kind of one-off and everyone moves on? I don't know. It just sets quite an interesting precedent in terms of what Donald Trump is happy or not happy with in terms of law and order under his presidency.
Yeah, it depends what they're protesting or rioting about, because, he's very, very angry and always comparing what happens on January the 6th to Black Lives Matter protests that the Democrats are more supportive of. And of course, to an extent, it depends what people are protesting about, which side is more sympathetic towards them and more prepared to excuse some violence on the extremes. But I don't think you need to have some kind of basic standard here. I think when Donald Trump is in office, if he likes it, it's okay. If he doesn't, it's not.
And Sarah, on the topic of pardons and pardoning people, before Joe Biden is done as president, do we think that he could pardon his son Hunter? Do you think that's going to happen or not?
Well, he definitely could, but he has been saying throughout Hunter's legal problems that he will not pardon him because he was wanting to look as though he was holding himself to a different legal standard than that which Donald Trump talks about. But, Hunter's in serious trouble. He's still to be sentenced in Delaware for illegal possession of a firearm and for an issue with his taxes in California. And now that Joe Biden's leaving and, nobody has to worry about their re-election prospects or anything like that, it's got to be really sorely tempting. I mean, who wouldn't think that, an elderly father would pardon his only surviving son? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Would that look like abject hypocrisy or just look like family?
Well, both really, I suppose. I mean, he and not only only surviving son, but a really troubled guy. I mean, there's no question. Whatever you think of Hunter Biden and that laptop and all the rest of it, the fact is he was a drug addict. He wrote really quite a moving book about his life. I don't know if either of you have read it. I read it a year or two ago when it came out, and I ended up feeling, I mean, not that he hadn't committed any crimes, but just really feeling sorry for him, in spite of the fact that he's kind of, in a sense, lived a life leeching off his dad because he was a lobbyist without any obvious qualifications to do the job, except the obvious family one. This is when Joe Biden was vice president in particular. But I also felt he is a really deeply troubled young son. And exactly as you say, Sarah, I think in those circumstances, given that Biden, his reputation in the long term is going to be, it will be what it will be. And it'll take a bit of time, I would suggest, for it to recover from his late pullout from this election and to recover among Democrats from it. But I think the additional thing of giving the son a pardon won't really count much in history, will it?
I think that the only thing would be the sort of short-term impact of it, which is that it would be weaponized by some of the people we've been speaking about who say, look, this is just further examples of the corruption and hypocrisy in the Democratic Party and from this current presidency. But I think, like you say, that the people who think that already about Joe Biden think that already. I think if you were Joe Biden, you might possibly regret more not doing something about it than doing something about it.
Okay, that's it for this episode. If you want to hear more episodes, go to our previous episodes on BBC Sounds. Bye.
Americast from BBC News.